Psalm 142. What I'm seeing as we go through these lament psalms is that there's a lot of common language I'm finding. As we do a lot of the psalms, a lot of things keep showing up, like the word mercy, discussion about enemies, various and sundry things. I started making a list of them, and one of these days, when I get to the point where I feel that list is complete enough, I'm going to print that list up, and then we're going to study 3 or 4 psalms all at one time with no note taken by me. We're just going to read through those psalms and see if we can interpret them on the fly with the language that we've already studied. Okay? And this is one of those psalms, but it's Psalm 142. And we're going to see that this psalm is about persecution rather than sin of the psalmist and repentance of the psalmist. We've seen, like in Psalm 51, we saw that was all about David being oppressed by his sin, seeking forgiveness for it, and going on through there. We've seen other psalms where it was all about persecution, where just the enemies were bearing down on David or the psalmist, whoever it happened to be, and it was about that with no real sin involved. It was just a matter of him calling out for mercy because he was being oppressed. This is one of those psalms like that. There's really no mention of sin. There's no indication that there's any kind of sin involved. It's just that David is faced with enemies that are giving him a hard time, wanting to kill him. So we're going to go through here and look at this and see what we can come up with, see what we can do with it as we study it. So verse 1 says this: I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. So David cries aloud. Maybe he's in the privacy of his own home, but whatever he's saying to the Lord, he's saying out loud. It's not a matter of thinking about it. He's actually saying it. He's in the cave of En-Gedi, I think, so this is going to have something to do with Saul. Yeah, when he was hiding out from Saul. Saul is probably the enemy that's out seeking to persecute him and kill him. But we don't have to interpret this psalm based on what was happening to David. We can read this psalm and insert our own life into this. And that's kind of the way I've interpreted this. Without that heading there, you wouldn't know that this had anything to do with David. Okay? So I think that might be a musical term. That's what I found a lot of these are, musical terms. Okay, so he cries aloud for mercy, which is his last, best hope, is through mercy from the Lord, and he lifts up his voice, crying out for mercy. In verse 2, it says, I pour out my complaint before him. Before him I will tell my trouble. So he's talking about seeking an audience before Yahweh to voice his complaint. Sounds a lot like Job. Job was being, he felt persecuted, like if he could just talk to God, get an audience before him, he could voice his complaint. Okay, so David is wanting to voice his complaint, and that complaint is actually what his problem is, and his problem we don't find out until verse 6 and verse 7. Let's just jump over there and we'll read them real quick so we'll see what his problem is. Verse 6 and verse 7, Psalm 142. It says, listen to my cry, for I'm in desperate need. Here's the problem. Rescue me from those who pursue me, for they are too strong for me. Set me free from my prison, that I may praise your name. That's his problem. He feels so oppressed. He's being pursued by these guys. They're persecuting. They're too strong for him. He's feeling oppressed and in prison. And that's what he wants to talk about God from. He's looking for deliverance from that. So verse 3 says this: when my spirit grows faint within me, it is you who it is you who know my way. In the path where I walk, men have hidden a snare for me. This persecution he is under is oppression, and his spirit feels weak. That's what he's talking about. And he feels trapped. Y'all jump over to Psalm 31:4. We've seen that before. Psalm 31:4. He says in Psalm 31:4, free me from the trap that is set for me, for you are my refuge. So there again, David felt trapped. It's the same way here. He says again, in the path where I walk, men have hidden a snare for me. That's a trap. And he feels oppressed because of it. The persecution, let's see, I think he already said that. Verse 4 says, look to my right and see, no one is concerned for me. I think you're going to see this right away. I have no refuge, no one cares for my life. Look at Psalm 25:16. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. The troubles of my heart have multiplied. Free me from my anguish. Look on my affliction and my distress and take away all my sins. So he feels the same thing here. His daily cares of life are weighing on him, and he feels like he is facing them on his own. He feels alone. Look what that said again in verse 4. Look to my right and see, no one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. That sounds just like Psalm 25:16. He feels alone. It's the same thing. Verse 5. I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Verse 4, he said, I have no refuge. Verse 5, he says, you are my refuge. We've seen that before. That kind of shows, I think, nervousness on his part. It's almost like hand-wringing nervousness. You know, you love me, she loves me not. She loves me, she loves me not. I have no refuge, you are my refuge. I have no refuge, you are my refuge. So it's not that he doesn't know God is his refuge. It's just that at the present time he feels alone. And then he gets to that verse 6 and says, 5 and says, I cry to you, O Lord, I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. When you're in the land of the living, what are you? If you're in the grave, what are you? Dead. If you're in the land of the living, what are you? You're alive. While I am alive, you are my refuge. That's what he's talking about. Verse 6, listen to my cry, for I'm in desperate need. Rescue me from those who persecute me, for they are too strong for me. He is desperate for a resolution to his complaint. The complaint that he said back in verse 1 or 2, whatever that was. It means he needs deliverance from this problem that he just specified, these men, and he needs it now. We get an idea here as to the level of the arrogance and persecution from his enemies. He says they are too strong for him. So David is one of these guys just like we are. We start having these problems and we feel like, I need to do something. Then we finally get to a point where we say, this is worse than I thought. Maybe I need to be calling on God. And that's kind of where David is. He said, whoa, I looked around and now I find that they're too strong for me. Okay. Verse 7. Listen to my cry, for I am in desperate need. Rescue me from those who pursue me, for they are too strong for me. That's 6. Verse 7 says, set me free from my prison, that I may praise your name. Then the righteous, when I'm set free from my prison, then the righteous will gather around me because of your goodness to me. He feels oppressed and imprisoned by their relentless pursuit, probably causing him to lose focus on complete trust in God. Now it seems like that's a strange thing to say, but he's pursued. You know, it's like the little boy with the broken airplane. I've used this before. He's got a broken airplane. He tries and tries to fix it himself, and he can't fix it, so he takes it to his dad, turns it over to him, and in frustration, watching his dad fumble around trying to fix it, he grabs it and takes it back. And that's how we get sometimes in our dealings with God, and that's how I think how David is. He feels really frustrated and deal with this thing. Then he finds out this problem that he's got is pretty bad. He turns it over to God. Then he wants to take it back from God. Okay? And he says he loses focus on that. He loses focus on complete trust in God. This is giving him what I've called what the Bible calls a divided heart. Look at 86:11. We're going to be Psalm 86:11. We're going to be studying that in just a minute, but let's look at it right here because it applies. Psalm 86, verse 11. Teach me your way, O Lord, and I will walk in your truth. Give me an undivided heart that I may fear your name. A divided heart, even for believers, we can have divided hearts. I think David has this severe oppression, pursuit, persecution problem, and it's causing him to wrestle with his focus on God. And it's giving him a divided heart. He wants to trust God, but then over on the other side, he's saying, I need to be doing something myself. Or and in our case, we want to live godly lives, but then problems and focus on material things and financial things and all kinds of things in the world get in the way, giving us a divided heart. In Psalm 86, he says, give me an undivided heart. In verse 7 here, 142, he says, set me free from my prison that I may praise your name. He's oppressed, and he wants to have that be delivered from that oppression. He's so oppressed he feels like he's in prison. He wants to be delivered from that, and in being delivered that, he's not going to have that as a distraction anymore, and it will give him an undivided heart. It'll be able to focus on God completely again, and that's what he's calling for, which we'll see when we study Psalm 86. And then it was so interesting for me when I read the last part of verse 7. It says, when I'm set free from prison, then the righteous will gather around me because of your goodness to me. His friends, his fellow believers, the righteous people of the land are going to support David. He's not going to feel alone. Maybe they were supporting him before, but he's got this thing where he's feeling lonely and afflicted, like Psalm 25 said, and now he's able to be to a point where he will realize that the righteous are there to support him. Okay, that's what and it looked like koinonia. My notes said if this had been New Testament, written in Greek, I would say this is koinonia. It's the last half of the verse 7 of Psalm 142.